distance concerning the of the of the host with both line the impact of and the of five particular of the different of the of the that five of first of all each act is of the about public was applicable for example about the student who was applied university external Scotland also which was allowed to form the student applied university Scotland national technical university of police professor history professor who was another professor allowed to the student applied the university of Genova in the area and also out of Scotland the history was so before the student Italy and that's the from the University of Madrid and under the student this one for the program of here that may TrainMoS means train multiples of the sea and train of the sea and that's what we find presentation. That's it for the what to say something from this country. Okay, so I'll go to next question. TrainMoS is a training multiples of the sea. For research from 7 countries, 7 universities participated in the program with the students from all these universities and this process what gives it this kind of action is the excuse to feed in with knowledge platform in which we have tried to put in all the knowledge needed to manage adequately multimodal trade, massive trade transport, including maritime TrainMoS is a program from the European Transport Network, a European Commission program, and tries to give an answer to massive transport, not from port to port as it was in the past time, but from door to door, or better to say from logistic platform to logistic platform. The white paper of transport, started roadmap to system European transport area towards a competitive or efficient transport system. The European Union needs a framework model for energy efficient with low-cost production, reliable, low-price transport, and advanced transport system. In that system, people have a major role as logistics sector. Maritime transport is essential to transport for long distance and for continental trade traffic. Most of the specific corresponds to priority action number 21. Priority from 21 including four areas: Baltic Sea of the North Sea, the Atlantic Mediterranean area, the Atlantic, the South Atlantic European area, the West Mediterranean, and the Eastern Mediterranean Atlantic. So those are the four areas of the priority project number 21 motorways of the sea. In the European South Atlantic area, we have included the important Iberian Islands, Azores and Madeira belong to Portugal, and the Canary Islands belonging to Spain, because those part of the world geography will be essential in the future as a bridge between the African traffic with the Europe and with the New World. Also, if we are talking about factories from transatlantic goods, the island, European island, in the Atlantic Lake and Asia. There's a problem. Although it seems that we have some problems with the European not world. Okay. Here, it's right. It's adjusted the stuff. Now, other things that they have the good that okay, okay. Just to come back to the situation, I understand that the people number 21 and divide for main areas, Eastern Mediterranean and actually West Mediterranean, Atlantic and then back to from some application to improve publish as I said, TrainMoS project targets to put on alternative methods that knowledge that to the more efficient way for the that traditionally last year's transport may not be people transport was the main thing. Now the world in Europe needs transport in and inclusive. Inclusive is manpower, with system. Inclusive, as I said, is manpower jobs. Better jobs with better return of better stuff, better good stuff, great. And great is the whole plan. That is the objective of this step by action of smart mix search and great first discussions and specific first participate for having church because of the specialization of different applications to develop efficient the mass model correct class. And I do that of all my people so not to people that work that have to work and to find taking from the of stuff so that they do for those stuff. So that they can for for I have destroyed the habitat of this of the fish this of other for here global knowledge to get of two this the state of that is the objective of spread ambition of the trying to develop the system. After the commission decision was taken, the transition program is trying to bring together the two government I said, the organization of the program, everybody takes notes. And the conceptual organization is also and we are almost in the middle of the mission. So the other activities are of size of knowledge by and the stakeholders. Yes, after this the website where of each journal information is available to everybody of the students of the and those stakeholders who they have access to the detailed information. The system we are structured to be completed after the last final action that takes place in this function. And also have a general utility contact which is on most way available for everybody and on most way news and comments and it's available open every and on the early management system as I go to the next place and this is a general view of what why to put this common effort between our partners. Hello? Yes? Yeah. are changing again the microphone. And now, why green ports? What is the concept of green ports? We have developed a module dealing with the smart cities intelligent ports. There are cities developed close to the main European ports because a commercial port is the center of activity and of richness. Now, the port has the link with the city and the link with the territory. It's obvious that the port has to be located area with maritime access and with suitable land access, being the port, the link between the maritime transport systems and the land transport systems. Now, that relation between the port and the territory needs knowledge on the coastal dynamics. The coast is a fragile system that has to be carefully considered because it's dynamic. It is not as dynamic as the sea itself, but it is not as stable as the land, being the frontier, the limit between the land, mostly stable, and the sea, mostly dynamic. And people in general are not used to work in semi-dynamic environments as the coastline is. Now, once the port is located at some place, it has had already its impact on the coastline. But for many years, the size of the port, which depends on the size of the maximum ship to be received in that port, has been linked to the materials out of which the ships could have been made. Now, when the ships were made out of wood, the maximum depth, including the possible movements of the ship within the ports, did not exceed the 6 meters of depth, free depth of water. So that was the depth of most commercial ports all over the world, till the new shipbuilding permitted with new materials, mainly steel and iron, to develop bigger ships. Now the needed enlargement of ports comes in collision with the coastal dynamics. And during this pilot action, we will pay attention to the integrated coastal zone management, because coastal management needs to take into account the needs of ports development. Now, the ports themselves, the commercial ports themselves, are centers of activity with a lot of work being developed within the port and a lot of energy consumed within the ports. Please, next slide. This is a nice slide of the sea. But when the sea is used, we don't like to have images as this one here, although this image creates jobs and creates wealth. Now, wealth has to be compatible with development. That's the main concept of sustainability. Next, please. To deal with this problem, we have to distinguish imports between commercial, industrial ports, labor ports, ports, leisure ports, offshore industry, micro airports. All of them are ports, but we are going to concentrate our efforts on commercial ports. Now, commercial ports, there are two absolutely different needs within the commercial port. That is when you deal with freight and when you deal with passengers. Definitely, traffic of passengers in the last decades has moved from the sea to the airport, to the airplanes. The important traffics with the new worlds now are served by airplanes. But during many years, the inhabitants of America, North America, South America, Australia arrived from Europe by ship. Now that traffic has lost importance in our new port system, but a new passenger traffic has arisen dealing with tourism, and we will deal with this problem later on because touristic ports need high quality, high environmental quality. So green ports is a need to develop the new concept of passenger ships within the European and global port system. Now, but coming back to freight ports, commercial ports dealing with freight, there are two different ways of dealing with the freight within the port. The regular lines and the tramp lines. Now, in the old times, and even today, there's a big part of cargo, of bulk cargo, going directly from the mines to the industries. That's the freight, the coal, iron ore, crude oil, petrol. But completely new traffic is arising and changing and pulling together the global world with the general goods traffic in containers. But to move efficiently containers, the arrival time of each ship to a port must be well known. So the needs of stable waters and the needs of entering the container ship at a certain port needs to arrive at a certain time of a certain date so that connections between different ships can be made. So it's a completely new concept that leads to completely new needs. We will come back to this point. Please, the next ships either with freight or with passengers, right? Both in trams, tram on irregular lines. they produce emissions. But emissions in a port is the port, the link between the maritime vehicles and the land vehicles are not only produced by the ships, are also produced by the land vehicles. In the land vehicles, the river barges or the locomotives from the railway system connected to the port, or the lorries arriving to the port, as well as the service vehicles within the port itself. But the commercial port is also a logistic area, and it's an energy consuming area. And being an energy consuming area, it creates employment, it creates wealth, and it has emissions. So the port is a place where emissions are produced and have to be limited to maintain its sustainability, and it has to be done in a smart way and in an inclusive way, because we are working for people, to make life of people better. Now, emissions can be to the air, to the water, or on land. The European Commission established that if nothing is done, air pollutants from ships in the European Union will exceed all combined land-based sources by 2020. Now, the emissions to the air are solid, powder, SO2, NOx, smells, odor, noise, heat. In the water, the European Directive on the water establishes different parameters for the different waters and distinguishes not only between salt sea water and river water, but also with the water within 4 areas. Accidents, heat. There are different sources that contaminate the water and that are linked to the industrial activities taking place in the transformation industries located in the logistic areas within the port areas, as well as those produced by the sea vehicles, that is the ships, and by the land vehicles, that is the lorries, the railway traction, and the inland waterway barges. Also, on the land itself, the land is occupied by roads, rails, different structures. The landscape is altered, contaminated land by accidents or not with accidents. Also, we construct things and those constructions lose their utility. We have to do something with them, not just leave it there. That is a new, the construction industry, which is being put on top of the table, and which is particularly important in highly industrialized areas, and definitely commercial port areas are industrialized areas which use manpower and which use energy and which are resource consuming and pollutant emitting, both to the air, to the water, and to the land itself. Emissions, for example, just a cruise passenger cruise ship, each one of these cruise ships consumes more electric power than many villages within Europe. It's a small, a floating, a small town, a dump terminal, a movie park, if no measures are taken to contaminate the air. Holy the emissions the water have to distinguish clearly between accidental emissions to the water and which are intended emissions, and those can be legal or illegal or necessary, although not desirable, as for example is the anti-fouling painting of the ships, anti-fouling, the poison that is solute slowly into the water, but it is a need to avoid high fuel consumptions of the ships while moving, because it avoids by poisoning in the waters close to the ship small animals to make the surface of the ship, for example. Accidental spills due to human error due to illegal actions that have to be prepared for because when none are given, something has to be done to make sure that the rules are followed adequately. This, for example, is an example of a spill effect on the beach, the coastline, an oil spill that may be an accidental one or an intended one. Naturally, there are international agreements that forbid to produce this type of spills. Next, please. Well, first and most important thing is to preserve life at sea. Now, classical solutions against accidents next this. If you want to avoid for example, to move dry bulk, this type of can be used so that the emissions to the air are reduced considerably. Now, how to avoid this? emissions, the air, the water, and with the land, maybe through regulation and the organization, people through Marco agreements. Water framework directive, which establishes particular conditions for the port waters, and we come to what will be part of the core of this course, and it's also a very important part of the European Commission transport policy concerning the use of new fuels, particularly LNG, as marine propulsion. We will come to a specific module on LNG, and we will give particular attention to the Costa project coordinated by Italy, and which is one of the priorities of the European Commission and one of the programs co-financed by TEN-T as European Transport Networks. Cold ironing, what is called cold ironing, that is electric supply imports. That's also new technology that is developing quickly. Surveillance and the detection of people who do not follow the rules. And raising environmental awareness by the society and by the politicians is one of the important issues, because in the democracy the budget are allocated according to social needs and to social awareness of the problems. So dissemination activities are essential to be able to develop adequate policies. Next, please. One of the essential parts of the Green Ports module concerning policies in the Baltic Sea and North Sea and the Channel in Europe and in the eastern and western coast of the United States and Canada in North America are a must, because there is an international agreement to reduce the emissions of SO2 and of NOx to the atmosphere and of particles, and the reduction of CO2 also, to reduce the acid rain and the very, very harmful to the persons that the NOx emissions produce to the people. So there is an international agreement in these areas to reduce those emissions, and that, as we will see during this pilot action, and we will put sufficient knowledge within the learning management system developed by TrainMoS, can be done with scrubbers, which are quite expensive and very heavy and have to be located in the top parts near the chimneys of the ships and create stabilizing problems, and overall what to do with the products coming out from the scrubbers. The other possibility is to clean even more to reduce the nitrogen and sulfur contents of the fuel, but that brings us to quite expensive fuels, and expensive fuels will mean expensive transport, and that will lead to a reduction of maritime transport and a reduction of the wealth, because commerce creates wealth and employment, and if we make it more expensive, we will reduce the global wealthness and the global employment. Now, the question is, will these agreements, international agreements, be extended to other areas of the world, to other coastal areas, or even to the deep sea navigation? Costa Project tries to give an answer to that question within the Mediterranean area, and don't forget that half of the Mediterranean, the northern part of the Mediterranean, are mostly European coasts, European Union coasts. Next, please. As I said, fuel emissions to the air can be reduced by the use of the scrubbers, the use of biofuels, but biofuels have an impact on the price of food in the world. The liquefied natural gas or other alternative fuels that could be used. Spain has a large experience in the use of liquefied natural gas because we have a lot of coastline, but we do not have an intensive gas pipeline net. So we have to distribute natural gas in liquefied form to be used at different industries within the Spanish territory by a large logistic chain using mainly trucks to move in an efficient way this dangerous product, which is the LNG that is transported at minus 163 degrees centigrade degrees. We will come back to this point when we deal with LNG as part, essential part of the Green Ports policy. The use of LNG puts on top of the table the need to bunker the ships with LNG, and that can be done from terminals directly to the ships by the use of pipelines or by the use of barges, the ship-to-ship bunkering, or bunkering small quantities from trucks, that is known as TTS, truck-to-ship bunkering, or even by the use of removable container LNG that can be put directly on a ship. But these containers and the connections between the containers and the ship itself is something that has to be normalized, that has to be developed. And there are a lot of efforts being carried out in recent times to develop these new activities concerning normalization of equipments, normalization of procedures and safety and security measures around the use of this new product within the shipping industry. But LNG can be used within the green port philosophy not only to bunker ships, and we will come to the discussion of which ships will use LNG first. Just as an introduction, all ships to be retrofitted with new machines working on LNG, or ships, new built ships with LNG. That's a question to answer. But another question is, LNG will be used in small ferry shipping, or in ro-ro ships, or in ROPA ships, or in touristic cruise lines, or in bulk ships, or in feeder container ships, or in transatlantic container ships. Now, just to advance part of what we will discuss in a different module of this pilot action, we think that LNG will begin to be used in small ships able to be bunkered every 2, 3, 4, 5 days at the most, and that LNG in the first stage will not be used by the big ships, transatlantic container ships, or big bulk ships in the first stage, because the main problem takes place within the ports and within the coastal areas, and lastly in the open sea. So being the main problem the port area where the ships are most of their time, or in the coastal area which are the most sensible to the environmental conditions, and areas that are reduced in dimensions and receive a lot of social pressure, or lastly in the open sea where the environment naturally has to be kept also, but because of its large dimensions and small anthropic pressure at this time and high capacity of absorbing emissions that the sea has, will most probably be the last place in which these new technologies will be used. But coming to the port area, which is the most intensive in energy use in this new world, where the port area is used as a logistic area, as an area where goods are being transformed, taking the advantage that there is an area where cargo is concentrated from different shipping lines coming to that particular port. There are those big ships that shipping using that port needs service boats, and those service boats navigating and using fuel within the port area during the whole service time, they can be working on LNG easily. And if there is bunkering facilities for shipping, there will be facilities for using LNG in these port service vessels. Now, what about the vehicles, the land vehicles within the port area? Most probably, compressed natural gas will be an alternative already used in urban bus transport in major cities or in garbage residual collecting in large cities where the garbage lorries or the urban buses can refuel at least once per day. Compressed gas reduces dramatically the NOx emissions to the air, and there are a large number of land vehicles working within the port area, and definitely if air emissions, NOx air emissions have to be reduced, the use of compressed gas together with LNG for the port service vehicles, both at sea and on land, will be used. But there are a lot of other vehicles different from trucks or railway traction or river barges that operate within the port area. For example, cranes, straddle carriers, forklifts. All of this material are big energy consumers. And if they are big energy consumers, they can run either on electricity or on diesel or any other oil derivatives. Now these oil fuels generate undesirable emissions to the atmosphere, and those machines, the straddle carriers, the cranes, can run either on electricity or on LNG or even in compressed natural gas. So most probably in the near future, all these energy consuming vehicles within the port areas will be using these new fuels. But the logistic area within the port is a big energy consuming. Mainly electric energy is used within the transforming industries in the logistic port areas and in any other industrial area. But the ships themselves, they need electricity when tied to the quays on the ports. Now, that electricity nowadays in most ports all over the world is produced by the auxiliary engines of the ships themselves, thus producing emissions to the air and emissions to the water. The heating water, they are heating the water, they are sending emissions of sulfur, oxides of nitrogen to the atmosphere. So most reasonable, those auxiliary engines in the future will be shut down when at port. But the ship itself needs energy, so it will have to be connected to the general electric energy supply that will have to be provided within the port areas. Now the question is, at what price because there are many aspects in the pricing of electric energy that disturb the market. And we must take into account that shipping and multimodal freight transport is a global activity. So there are some economic activities that, because they have to take place at some location, there are possibilities to force them with taxation or with other measures because they are linked to the territory. But global transport has enormous degrees of freedom. So when they are not subject to the laws of the market, they don't work. So something will have to be done in the future about the pricing of electricity within the port areas. But it will not only be a question of pricing, it will be also a question of production of electricity. As everybody knows, electricity cannot not be almacenada. It has to be produced when consumed. So most probably we will come to, in areas such as a port area, in which at the time you could have 5, 6 cruise ships. For example, now it's happening in ports like Genova or Barcelona, where 5 cruise ships arrive at a time, and the electric power supply within the port area is not prepared to attend that punctual demand, high demand of electricity. So local production of electricity will have to be done. Most probably gas turbines or similar systems are a good solution. So if we are talking of cold ironing at ports, we have to produce energy in the port area to attend the peaks in the demand of electricity in the port area. And that again can probably be attended by fuels such as LNG. So we are linking a lot LNG logistics with the green port concept, which is a need to develop in the future, or to continue developing multimodal freight transport within Europe. And that needs prepared people, smart people with reasonably high salaries because of their reasonably high specialization needed to reduce cost transport through high knowledge needed for these high-tech operations, and naturally all these infrastructures are inclusive because they cannot work without people. Smart people are needed, so these are inclusive policies in the benefit of people. We are sticking tight to the principle of people first, and people first need efficient and cheap freight transport to create employment, to create wealth, to develop a better way of living, not just for the inhabitants of one port area, but for everybody in this new global world to which shipping contributes so much. Next, please. This is an image of the port of Barcelona. There is some place you can go to the image. Here, this you can see here each of these cruise ships has an electric power consumption similar to a small town of about 20,000 inhabitants in a warm country. In a cold country, much higher consumption. And just in this photograph of the port of Barcelona, we can see ports at the time. So there are many other areas. To have at the time 6 to 10 ships is quite normal in many important ports within Europe. And this opens the window to important new needs. Yes. Combined principle that means supply ships need a lot of normalization because the frequency detections connector within the port have to be either you use code item for a specific ships on a specific ports, or if you want to open the use of the port to different ships, you have to make a big effort in normalization of equipment. All can be done what is called blockage of high tension, very high tension. The high tension, the less connectors you need, the less connectors you need, the less time you lose connecting the ship to the crane. But there are many questions here. What frequency will be the electric power supply? Europe has one frequency mainly. The United States have another frequency. But shipping is in all the continents, in Asia, America, Australia, Europe, Africa. A lot of research and development and normalization activities have to take place, and they have to take place quickly. And European engineers, European students in an excellent position within this global world to find employment in these new global needs that are arising around the global commercial activities. Just some images of some exercises being done in cold ironing with low tension and high voltage in the port of Gothenburg in Sweden has large experience. At Bremen and Hamburg in Germany, there are many ports that are developing different diseases, but still a lot of normalization work has to be done. In any case, it's important to remember that all ships, when built at the shipyard, they have electric power connectors. When the ship is in the shipyard, there is energy distribution within the ship, but the engines are not working. So most ships have already a viability of electric connectivity, but the ship is connected to the specific electric power supply within the shipyard in which it is built. Now, the problem is to come to a sort of a global ship electricity power connections with normalized tensions, frequencies, connectors, and procedures. Besides the fact of producing energy, electric energy at a reasonable price for the needs of the peaks. This is a whole irony using a barge for helping with the connectors within the ship. Next slide, please. Oh. Transporters used within the ship over ice and the waves. Actually, it's much better to have the frequency, the extensive frequency transport within the port area and not within the ship itself. In high tension, which is the future of coal mine, just one connector is used instead of 24 connectors needed with the other tension. That means that making 4 electric connections takes over half an hour. So in a couple of minutes, that takes use just one connector. This means that if you want to shut down the engines, the auxiliary engines of the ship with a whole, let's say, less than 2 hours, more than 2 hours, 55 minutes for the ship call on the port to shut down the auxiliary engines. That question depends a lot on the time needed to make the connections and to disconnect the ship from the shore electric net. Next, please. So coal ironing will also be one of the main issues of this Green Ports module of TrainMoS learning management and learning platform, knowledge platform. Now, Mar-Pollution agreements forbid to throw to the sea wastewater, black waters used in the ship, in the lavatories, bathrooms, kitchens. That water is stored within the ship and it has to be sent to the sewage urban system of the city where the port is ubicated, or within to the own sewage net of the port itself. So the ship needs to receive a supply of fresh water for its trip, and it could produce its own fresh water with the osmosis of different systems on board. A ship can produce the fresh water to be used within the ship, but the ship has not the sewage treatment plants to deal with its black waters. So more important even than the fresh water supply within the ship are the connections to evacuate the garbage and the black waters produced during the navigating period of the ship. Vacuum connections to harvest the black waters have been developed in most European ports and will be even developed more in the future, because the time of the port call of the ship tends to be reduced to a maximum with the efficient use of cranes and of machinery to move or remove the cargo from the ship, either in bulk or in containers, or even passengers coming in and out of the ship. But if the time of the port call is reduced, the efficiency of the systems to provide the ship with water and to take out of the ship the black water have to ameliorate in efficiency and in speed. NATO ships or NATO ships for a long time shut down the auxiliary engines at ports. This, for example, is a vision of the port Rota in southern Spain, a NATO base. All NATO naval ships are programmed to receive electricity when in port, and the NATO standards are followed by all NATO navies of the NATO countries. Next, please. The naval base of Rota, for example, the possibilities to supply for cruise ships. There are technical centers started there with monopolar ships for keeping NATO regulation. The core net is there almost in parallel with the waste harvested the black waters of the single collective system. They provide the same construction. Waste electric with the details of the patient. After today, there are different commercial ports which are with vacuum systems for exporters that is only the port system which is according to the normalized European standards with total compatibility with interconnections. The NATO ships belonging to the NATO organization. So, during this TrainMoS manufacture 3, we are going to pay special attention to these aspects. I have scheduled briefly during this introductory lesson of the pilot action, and we will also pay big attention to the coastal zone understanding and to the coastal zone management, because ports necessarily have to be located in the coastal line. And the coastal line, the dynamic line, is a not well understood line, and there is a dialogue, there is a permanent relation between the commercial port activities, the city and the inhabitants of that city which live on the port, thanks to the port, and find wealthiness in the port. So there is a dialogue between the city and the port, but at the same time there is another dialogue with another language, but as important as the first one, between the port and the territory. So we are, from the conceptual point of view, we are looking at the port itself and different activities taking place within the port, communications, sea part of the port, land part of the port, energy consumption of the port itself as an object of study and consideration, the relation of the port within the economic framework, global framework of commerce and global wealth that is developed thanks to the commerce, and particularly in the Italian module and the Spanish module, we are paying attention to the dialogue between the port and the city. And the city is not only the infrastructure, the buildings, the nets, the urban transport net, it's the people living in the city. So between the people and the port, different to those people involved in the transport chain or involved in the whole commerce system and wealth system profiting from the transport system. And last but not least, the relation between the commercial port itself and the coastal territory, because they are not independent. They are not independent. There are two types of ports around the world. Those ports which benefit from the estuary zones, which fortunately for many European countries, most of the big European ports, Hamburg, Bremen, London, or Spain, Sevilla, the old port of Bilbao, the old port of Cartagena in Spain, or the new ports that need more draft, bigger areas that are close to cities which have with inhabited cities with very expensive territory, and either because of the needs of water depth of draft or because of the lack of territory on land, they have to expand to the sea and make land reclamations from the sea or protect from the energy of the waves and the movements, the different type of movements of the sea surface and of the sea water, tides, waves, currents, mainly waves. But that dialogue between the coastline and the port needs, which will be increasing, are already increasing with a conflict between the needs of the people needing the wealth, the commerce that is a sub-project of the port activity, and the full respect to the coastal fragile environmental conditions. So we are going to dedicate a part of the module to understand how the coastal line works, how are the artificial works made by the man to alter nature, in the benefit of the man to create port areas, but with the maximum respect to the environmental conditions. And this pack, it's normally understood in the university areas and in the social sphere as the integrated coastal zone management, where natural processes have to develop in a compatible way with human needs that have to be attended. Now we are coming to the end of our time in this module, so I would like to open the floor to any question to the students here in Madrid, but also to the students following us in Sweden, Germany, Greece, Italy, Portugal, and Scotland. So please, thank you very much for your patience and for your attention in this first lesson of our module, and the floor is open to you, students from Europe. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Can you tell us which is the current implementation level of cool ironing in Europe and in Spain?
Thank you. As I said, in Spain, cold ironing is not developed except in the NATO naval bases. The Rota NATO naval base has cold ironing with NATO standards, but our port system, as you know, in Spain we have 46 ports, big ports administered by 28 port authorities. At this moment, only a few ports of the port system are considering or are in deep study of cold ironing. When ships need electricity in the quay to put down the auxiliary engines, or because they have any problem or for any other reason, there are movable electric power generators, the same ones that are used within the cities when there is a shutdown or of electricity, or where there is a problem with the electric power supply because there has been some transformer is has burned, or for many other reasons. There is all the cities have a fleet of electric power generators, and those generators normally move by a truck head, like containers. Those containers are put close to the ship. They generate the electricity, but they generate the electricity using fuel. So from the emission point of view, nothing is gained with that system. It's an emergency procedure to help some ships that need electric power supply. In Europe, probably our colleagues from Gothenburg can show us their excellent examples because Gothenburg is a reference port, and Bremen and Hamburg also, but there are many other ports in Europe that are beginning to have this cold ironing, but specific ships in a specific quays, because still there is not a common connecting standards developed so as that any ship can come to any port in the future to connect at any or at a fixed tension with a fixed frequency and with a fixed connector. That is something that will have to be developed. Hopefully, finding a job, many of the students following this TrainMoS course that are in unemployment now, and we hope they will find unemployment within this new technology, that it is a need in the whole Europe and particularly in Spain. Any question from any country listening to us? No? Okay. There's some other question here.
Good morning. You have talked about green port. So who is the main driver for development of green port concept, government or private initiative?
That's a very good question. It was not prepared between the students and the professor. Public-private partnership is the answer of the port system in general to this difficult economic situation which Europe in particular is living during these years. Asia ports are growing, traffics even in Europe are growing at half the rate of other ports in Asia or in Africa, but public investment is being cut down dramatically in many areas. Particularly, I know the Spanish case, but I'm afraid that other countries are also subject to this same problem: Greece, Portugal, Italy. Now, the private industry will come into these new environmental friendly technologies if there is either an obligation or a benefit. It is much more reasonable to found policies, from my modest point of view, on interests, on benefits, than on punishments. But both ways are a way. If there is an obligation, a legal obligation to limit emissions at port, and the only way to limit those emissions is by shutting down the engines, that's a way. But probably it is not the most desirable way. And actually, if you put from the public point of view, the governments have the power to regulate. So any government can regulate the emissions and give freedom to the ship owner either to use fuel accomplishing the standards fixed by the government. It comes to high-cost fuels, or to pay the taxes or the penalties imposed by the authority for not respecting the rules. Or there's a much better way, which I think is the way that has been chosen in the several times mentioned port of Gothenburg in Sweden. And that is to give reductions in port taxes and import fees to those ships, reducing from a voluntary point of view the emissions while within the port, because those emissions have a cost to society, and that cost to society is not yet clearly evaluated, but there's no doubt there is a cost. Now, if there is a premium, a price to anybody who reduces those emissions, as long as that price is lower than the cost of the emissions produced, that is a benefit for the whole of the society. Now, to fix clearly which are those benefits, a cost analysis of the cost of the emissions has to be accomplished, and that has not been done. There has been different tentatives. Clearly, the damage, the emissions make in northern countries and in southern countries is different. because it has to do with the temperature, with the hours of sunshine, with the speed of the wind, with many things. So it is not a common number for all the ports. There are reasonable places and reasonable places, not all the land, not all the locations, not all the coastal areas are equally adequate to port activities, because the capacity of receiving or processing undesirable emissions are different. Now, coming to your question, the private sector will move only by any of those two reasons, or there is a coercive way in which producing emissions comes to penalties, or there is a premium to prevent those emissions. I would like to see this world moved by premiums and by incentives, moved, favored by knowledge of the governments, knowing the cost of those emissions to the society in general, because the numbers made by the government and the numbers made by the private companies are completely different. The government has to take into account different cost parts that not necessarily are on the financial market. The private economy moves with an eye put on the general economic aspects, but with another eye put on the financial aspects. Governments have to move, or should have to move, much more on the economical aspects more than the financial aspects, and the economical aspects have to take into account all the different cost issues. And there are many cost issues which exist and that are not taken into account up to date. The green accounting, knowing exactly the cost of these emissions on the ports they have to the society. That's a very important issue, to develop these technologies that, on the other hand, may provide employment to our European technicians, because they have to be spread all over the world if they are based on real cost reductions, global cost reductions to society, and not just on financial issues. So I find that the state actually in Europe can regulate, but they are not in the best position to finance. But through regulation, financing comes immediately, in one way or in another. It is not the role of the governments to put the money. It is the role of the governments to understand, to have knowledge, and to write laws and to establish policies, reasonable policies based on sound knowledge. And it is the private sector that has to develop their profitable activities and generate employment within the reasonable rules developed by smart governments, with decisions taken on smart decisions based on sound knowledge. Without knowledge, it's very, very difficult to develop reasonable policies. But coming to your question, government role is to regulate, private sector is to maximize profit within the regulations. So it has to be a joint effort between the regulator, the public regulator, and the private business developer, in my opinion. So we are coming close to the time of our next lecture. Any question from any country listening to us? Well, thank you again to Portugal, to Italy, to Greece, to Scotland, to Germany, and to Swedish students following this module. And thank you to the students here in Madrid attending this pilot action. We will come in a couple of minutes with the next scheduled lecture. Thank you.